The New Norm is brought to you by Winning at Home. I'm Steve Norman. Welcome to The New Norm. I don't remember where I heard it, but somebody once brought up the idea of cave theology. They're like, if you think about it, there are a lot of different references to caves in the scripture. And that's true. Lot and his daughters lived in a cave in Genesis chapter 19. And in Genesis 23, when Abraham buried his wife Sarah, he buried her in a cave. And when Joseph was abandoned by his brothers, they threw him in a pit, which kind of functioned as a vertical cave. And when Joseph was in prison, he was kind of in a cave type moment. When Jonah was in the belly of the whale, it felt like he was in a cave. When Lazarus was buried in a tomb, and eventually when Jesus was buried in a tomb, they put him in a cave. So when we're looking for them, we see caves all over the scriptures. And in caves, we don't have any agency. We don't have any creature comforts. In caves, there's no success. There's no status. There's no community. Caves are dark and cold and dank and lonely. And one of my favorite cave references is found in 1 Kings chapter 18, verse 4, it says, when Jezebel, who was this horribly twisted and wicked queen, was killing off the Lord's prophets, Obadiah, who was a palace official, had taken 100 prophets and hidden them in 2 caves, 50 in each, and had supplied them with food and water. And sometimes when I'm in a cave season, I feel like God is punishing me. But when I read 1 Kings 18 about Obadiah and the 100 prophets in 2 caves, I'm reminded that sometimes when we're in cave seasons, it's not because we're hiding. It's because God is hiding us. And sometimes God leads us into seasons where we feel hidden, not because we would choose them, but God chooses them for us for our protection, for our safety, for our growth. Caves are places where God says, I'm protecting you. You're safe here. Now, I try to reiterate it on this podcast as often as I can. Like I'm not a therapist, but I work with some really amazing clinicians here at Winning at Home. And they keep reminding me that when somebody is a survivor of trauma, or if somebody's recently coming out of trauma, one of the first things we want to establish for them is meeting their need for safety. Because we can't heal from past threats unless we feel like we're in an environment that is contained and where we are protected. And caves are seasons where God says, you're going to be safe here. Nobody can hurt you now. And I remember going through a season in my life where I felt like I was hidden and I didn't know why. And I was healing from a particular wound in my life and my calling. And there was one person who was primarily responsible for that hurt that I found myself carrying a lot of resentment towards and even some fear from. Like even though I was separated from that person by time and distance and by all the power dynamics that they had over me before were gone. Like they didn't have any leverage over me. And I remember one night when I was still wrestling with this issue and asking God to lead me into mercy and teach me forgiveness and heal just the depth of the brutality of that season, I had a dream. And in it, there was this person. I could see his face quite clearly. And I had always remembered him being this kind of larger than life, tall, strong, imposing figure. But in the dream, he was really weak and frail and bent over. And this doesn't happen to me very often, but it's almost, I felt like I heard God say to me almost immediately after I woke up, Steve, he can't hurt you anymore. And I believe that sometimes God puts us in caves to remind us that we are safe from the threats that we had faced before, or maybe from the threats that are still existing, but God is putting us in a position where he can defend us. And for me, God was reminding me that people from my past didn't have the reach to come back and hurt me again. And in the 1 Kings 18 story, God is reminding the prophets who have been running for their lives that they are in that moment, in that specific space, safe under the hand of God, within the walls of the cave, in the company of one another, from the threat of somebody who is trying to do them harm. So in our cave seasons, God gives us a gentle reminder that he's protecting us. In cave seasons, God also says, I am providing for you. I love the line in there that says, not only did Obadiah hide them, but it says that Obadiah supplied them with food and water. Like, I would have preferred cheeseburgers and Diet Dr. Pepper. Sometimes in cave seasons, we don't get all of the luxuries and the bells and whistles of what we believe our best life to be, but God gives us what we need. We get food, and we get our daily bread, and we get water. In 1 Kings 17, there was another season where Elijah is trying to hear from God. In 1 Kings 19, Elijah is on the run from Jezebel as well, and we read in the passage that it says, the word of the Lord came to Elijah. He said, leave here, turn eastward, and hide in the Kerith ravine east of the Jordan. You will drink from the brook, and I have directed the ravens to supply you with food there. So God was saying, Elijah, I need you to enter into a cave season, but know this. When you get there, not only will you be safe, but you will be secure. Your needs will be provided for. And if you're in a cave season right now, your tendency or your temptation, your core longing might be to get out of there as soon as you can. And God is saying, no, I've got you here for a reason. I'm going to keep you safe, and I'm going to provide for your needs. And then the cave season is also a reminder that God says to us, I am pursuing you. In 1 Kings 19, we read that Elijah, who's having like this battle with God and this frustration that God is not coming through for him in the way that he wants him to, it says Elijah went into the cave and spent the night, and the word of the Lord came to him there and said, what are you doing here, Elijah? And Elijah kind of has a speech that he gives back to God, but he never fully answers the question. And then the scripture says that there's a wind, which would not have been uncommon because the Hebrew word for spirit and the Hebrew word for wind are the same word. It's ruach. And when we read Genesis chapter 1, it says the Spirit of the Lord was hovering over the surface of the waters. So it was actually saying the wind of the Lord, the breath of the Lord was hovering over this. So it would not have been uncommon for God to show up in wind. But it says God wasn't in the wind. And there was an earthquake. And when we read the story of the people of God in Exodus, there was a rebellion. There was a guy by the name of Korah, and he and his followers defied God's command and God's chosen leader, Moses. And as a result of the rebellion, there was an earthquake, and the earth actually swallowed up Korah and his followers. So God, in history, has been in the wind. He's been in the earthquake, and God's also been in the fire, which comes next. In fact, just the chapter before this, God actually descends on the top of Mount Carmel in fire. So like just a couple days before, we had seen God appear in fire. But God's not in the wind. He's not in the earthquake. He's not in the fire, but he's in a whisper. And 1 Kings 19:13 says, Elijah pulled his cloak over his face and went out and stood at the mouth of the cave. Sometimes the mouth of the cave is like this liminal, this transitional space where we can hear from God in ways that we could not have heard from him before. In fact, in Exodus 33, God has promised or offered to show Moses his glory. And he says this to Moses in verses 21 and 22. He goes, there's a place near me where you may stand on a rock, and when my glory passes by, I will put you in the cleft in the rock and cover you with my hand until I have passed by. God was saying, Moses, the only place where you can safely observe me is in the mouth of the cave. And sometimes when we're in cave seasons, we can experience God's compassion, his gentleness, and his pursuit in ways that we might not be able to experience anywhere else. And then finally, when we're in cave seasons, I think that God is saying, you don't know this yet, but I am preparing you for a season that's still coming. And when we read that David, who would one day become king, has actually already been anointed or identified as king, but he can't take the throne yet because Saul is still fulfilling that role. When Saul is chasing David through the Judean wilderness, it says that David and his friends hid in a cave. And ultimately, David was in a cave with not 50 men. David was in a cave with hundreds of men. And it was in those seasons when he was on the run, when he was in his cave times, where he was deeply uncomfortable, God was teaching him how to lead other people who were uncomfortable as well. And we don't know that David, at least the best version of David, would have been the leader that he was if he hadn't had this cave training that he had. Also, when Obadiah hides these prophets in the cave, they're hiding there until there is kind of like an outbreak of revival. And once that happens and it's safe for them to come out again, they can speak God's truth with boldness. They can disciple the masses who have come to faith with courage and boldness because of the lessons that they've learned in the cave. And I think that sometimes God allows us to meet other people who are in cave seasons as well to encourage us and sustain us. Robert Fulghum wrote a great book called All I Ever Needed to Know I Learned in Kindergarten. And he goes, one of the games that we love to play as kids is hide and seek, where we go somewhere and we hide alone and we wait for other people to find us. He goes, a different kind of game, a game that I have found more life-giving, he writes, is the game of sardines, where you go and hide, and then when somebody finds you, they hide with you. And maybe God has you in a cave season where you feel terribly and horribly alone, and you don't know when you're getting out. I guess my strong encouragement to you would be this. Is it possible that you are going to meet or connect with other people who are in a cave season as well? Is it, not to make light of your season, but is it possible that God is inviting you to a sardines moment where you're going to find another person who is in the cave season that you are in, and together you can encourage one another. Together you can lean into God's promise that he's protecting you, that he's providing for you, that he's pursuing you, and that he's preparing the both of you, or the few of you, or the handful of you, or you as a family for something incredible that is right around the corner that you don't have eyes to discern just yet. The New Norm is produced and distributed by Winning at Home. Winning at Home is a faith-based nonprofit committed to making individuals, couples, families, and businesses stronger through counseling and coaching. For more information, visit winningathome.com. I'm your host, Steve Norman. Thanks for listening.